Reading is one of the best ways to learn new vocabulary, but it's important to do it effectively, and especially when you're a beginner, to use the right resources. And unfortunately, I see very often among my students that is not the case. Hola, soy Alejandro, de KeySpanish, and let's dive into today's video. You are going to first learn about the different types of reading, which will give you important insights into what to expect and what your goal should be. Then I'm going to share with you what exactly to read as a beginner in Spanish. And we're going to finish with the 4-step reading process that will give you the best chance of getting the most out of this important activity. In the language learning world, it is common to hear when talking about reading terms such as intensive reading or extensive reading. But we don't need that jargon. Let's simply think of it as reading to enjoy, reading to learn, and reading to suffer. Reading to enjoy would be what people call extensive reading. That is reading for pleasure, reading without stopping to look up words or thinking about the grammatical structure or any of that. You are just focusing on the story. When reading to learn, that is when people normally will call intensive reading, it is when you do look up words and you focus a bit more on the meaning of those words, and you may stop and consider the grammatical structure of certain parts of it, and you are more a learner using the text to acquire new vocabulary or focus on certain structures. And reading to suffer is unfortunately what most beginners go through in the beginning. It's when you don't understand most of what you are reading and you have to look up everything, you don't understand the story at all, and it's just a struggle to go through every page of a book. And let's put some numbers into each of these stages by looking at the research that links the number of words, the percentage of vocabulary that you are familiar with in a text with your ability to comprehend that text. And this research is telling us that in order to read to enjoy, that is, when you understand over 75% of the text, is when you are familiar with basically all the words, 98 to 100% of the text. And in order to read to learn, you need to understand over 1 out of every 10 words, so 90 to 98% of the text. And that gives people around a 50% comprehension rate. And if you are familiar with less than that, or less than 90%, all the research suggests less than 80%, then your comprehension is so low that it's basically very difficult to get anything out of the reading experience. And therefore, our goal should be taking you from reading to suffer, which is where currently most beginners will be, to reading to learn. And in the end, our goal, as with watching or listening, is to do it for the enjoyment of it, not just to learn vocabulary or to look up into grammar structures, but to get yourself immersed in the story or in whatever it is that you are, again, reading, watching, or listening. Seeing how much vocabulary of a text we need to understand in order to comprehend a meaningful part of it makes clear that it's very, very important to choose the right things to read. And that's what we are going to cover next. Before going into specific resources, let's look at a couple of features that we need to look for in a text. The perfect text is first compelling, that is of interest to you. It is comprehensible, as you have seen. It's important that you understand most of the words, over 90% of it in a text. It has audio with it, and you can also reference a translation to make it easy to look up certain words that you don't understand as you go through it. And this is where beginners struggle, because finding something that is both compelling and comprehensible can be tricky. Obviously, when you are starting out, you need very, very, very simple text, and therefore you are not going to start with the Stephen King novel. And the stories that you are going to read about have to be necessarily very, very simplified. However, there are better resources than others. And that takes me to a very important point, which is where not to start. I see very often among my students that they get started reading children's books because they think they are simple and they are, I don't know, a good place to start for a beginner. But that's far from the case. And let's look at an example. Cinderella is a very common story, and I think this book is aimed at 6 to 8 year olds. And I'm going to show you the very first, or one of the very first paragraphs in the story in English to make the point. And you can stop and read if you want to. The stepsisters rest in the finest grounds and slept in the finest beds. The poor girl was given only rags to wear, etc., etc. So if you see this text, I'm sure as an English speaker, you don't consider this easy, right? But let's put some numbers into it. I ran this through a text analyzer, and it says that it's for the B1 level of a foreign language. And even as a B1 level text, which is for intermediate students, it has quite a few words in just a couple of sentences that are above that level, like straw, ashes, fireplace, racks, right? So you can see a children's book is not necessarily easy or straightforward. As I already mentioned in my video about mastering vocabulary, you will find the link somewhere in the screen or in the description to that video. Graded readers are a much better source of reading for you. These are books designed for adults learning a foreign language, and they choose carefully the vocabulary and the structures that is used in the story. And my favorite ones are the Lola Lago series and the Un Día En series, both from the publisher Difusión, because they are well written, they are a bit more compelling than you can expect from this kind of books. And also they have audio available and a glossary and some comprehension questions. And we can look at a sample of one of these books, and it's something I recommend you do anytime you buy a book in a foreign language, or in any language really, but look at the sample and check the difficulty of it to see if it's a good fit or not. And you can see it presents the characters of the story first to give some context. Another good advice when you are reading in a foreign language is to pay very careful attention to the first chapter. Be very intense about that because it sets the context, it sets the stage for the rest of the story. So it will help you a lot to understand what you read. And you can see here un nuevo caso. Lola mira el reloj, las 8. En media hora termino y me voy a casa. Al fin. Ha sido un día largo y complicado. Lola está cansada y quiere volver pronto a su sofá. So it has the text, and you will have professional audio also, as you can see here on the website. It has a link, has some pictures too. So it's a good story. However, some of you may be complete beginners, or you just know a few words and are just starting out. In that case, even this book will be too difficult. Again, we are aiming at a 90% comprehension rate at the very least of vocabulary. So I have other recommendations. This series of graded readers are even simpler. You have Hola Lola, which is the one I recommend the most to get started. It is quite silly, but it's very effective because it repeats the story, it repeats the vocabulary again and again. Let's again look at the sample. Yo me llamo William, yo soy inglés, yo soy de Inglaterra, yo soy de Newcastle. Me llamo William y soy inglés. Soy de Inglaterra, de Newcastle. Vivo en Madrid. So you can see lots of repetition, and it's much more straightforward than the previous one. It is, however, a bit less compelling. Fortunately, it's not such a developed story, and again, it can be quite silly sometimes, but it's fun, and students do enjoy it. And you have a similar concept in graded readers written by Ana Martín and Paco Ardit. Hola Lola and the Ana Martín books, as far as I know, do not have audio with it. And the Paco Ardit series does have audio. It's from Argentina. It's Argentinian Spanish, but it has both audio and very simple texts. The second type of text I recommend are bilingual texts. These present both the story in Spanish and in English. Let's look again at the sample from the books by Joe Arenas. You can see the chapters are again very short with a simple language, and you have Tomás y Lucía están casados in Spanish, and then the translation just below in English. Again, as far as I know, these do not have audio, but they are a great way of making a text comprehensible. You will find links to everything I'm mentioning, all the books, in the description of this video. Remember, as a beginner, don't start with children's books. There are much better options out there for you, greater readers and bilingual text. And it's important, I would recommend reading always on a digital format. On Kindle would be the easiest one, even your phone has a Kindle app or your iPad, or you may have a Kindle reader, because it allows you to easily look up words by clicking on them. So you have many of the features that we have discussed, right? You have in some of the books the audio, you have the translation, and these are comprehensible and a bit compelling. Again, it will not be the best novel you have read, but it will be much more compelling than children's books, for most of you at least. And let's look at two more options for reading if you are a beginner. There are websites that offer interactive text that have many of the features we are looking for. My two favorites are QuizIQ and Lingua.com. Let's briefly look into them. On QuizIQ, you have here an example with the text about Benidorm, and you start with the audio here, and then are presented with the text, which is interactive. It's quite handy because you can click on any part of it and you get the translation. So very useful. One thing I don't like so much is that the audio is very, very slow. They speak very slowly and you cannot speed it up. And it loses a bit of the natural pace of the language, which, as you are going to see later in our 4-step reading process, is not ideal. And then in Lingua.com, again, you have a text, mi nueva casa, and you have audio from different places. And these audios are recorded, as far as I know, as far as I can tell at least, because nowadays the technology is so good, but these are native speakers audios. These are not robots, and it's very good, very natural. You can also change the pace of it, but you don't have a translation. However, we will fix that. I'm going to show you a tool that is very useful to translate anything on any page. And you have comprehension questions. It's not something I find particularly valuable for the process I'm going to describe, but you may enjoy having them. The thing with Lingua.com is that you only have, I think, one text with audio, and the rest are limited to the premium version, so you have to pay for it. It is, however, quite affordable. As far as I can see now, it's just $10 a year. So I think it's worth it, to be honest, because it's quite good. And lastly, we have apps. There are apps dedicated to helping you read in foreign languages. My two favorites are Langster and LinkU. I'm not going to dive into this very deeply, especially LinkU. You will have lots of all the videos and people sharing how it works. It's an excellent app. But I would like to cover Langster because it's quite good. You have different stories at different levels. And for example, let's look at the A1 level, the most basic one, Russia's hottest model, a friendly adopted beer. So you can see the stories will be a bit more compelling than your normal grader reader about the detective, because they are real stories. And this is the best part, my favorite part, all the features it has. It starts with the story itself, which you can listen to. One thing is the audio here, it is from artificial intelligence, so it's a text-to-speech technology, but it is very good. It's quite natural. It will be hard for someone to tell. But you do have audio of every story and you can change the pace. And it has lots of good features. You can click on any of the words and you are presented with information. If it's grammatically relevant, you also have some grammar lessons, and you can listen to each of the words individually. And you have here the translation feature, which is excellent. You click on here and then you get the translation sentence by sentence, which is much better in my opinion than full chapters translation. So this is very, very good. You then have a quiz to check your comprehension. Again, I don't find this super useful, but this part is very cool, which is the keywords. You have the important keywords in the story and you can add them to your flashcards. So you can ask the software to remember this and practice later on in the training section in a software that is quite good. So you have start, conjugate, and you flip the card to be, and you can again see the conjugation of a verb. If it's a verb, if it's a noun, it doesn't show that. And you tell the software, easy, okay, hard, and it will show it again depending on that choice. The not so good thing about Langster is that the free version is basically useless, just one story. So you really do have to pay if you want to make anything out of it. And it's not as affordable as Bilingual.com. I think it changes country by country, but last I checked in the US it was $60 per year or something like that. So, well, you have to decide if it's worth it for you or not. But it's a great app because it covers everything we have said, right? It has the audio of it. It is a bit more compelling because there are interesting stories. You have the translation with one click. And yeah, it makes it very, very easy to read in a compelling and comprehensible way. And again, you can check link too, which is, it's quite good. It's similar. The principle is similar. You can see any text and click on words and get a translation. You can hear the audio, and it has other cool features too. But the free version is also limited, and it's, I think, even more expensive. But it's good. It's a very, very good app. However, well, you see, you have many options to read. You have graded readers, bilingual text, there are websites with interactive text, there are apps. But whatever you choose, it's important to read in the right way, to have a process for reading, especially when you are a beginner. And that's what we're going to describe now. Let's see what this 4-step reading process looks like. You first listen to the text, and you understand, you feel, and you master the text. And to show you, I'm going to follow along with the text. I'm going to use lingua.com and Reverso Context. We said Lingua does not have translations, but this website extension, browser extension, Reverso Context, gives us translation to everything on the web, both the word and the sentence level, and it's a very, very, very useful tool. I'm going to use the text I showed you before, titled Mi Nueva Casa. And the first thing would be, again, to just listen to the text. And we will listen, we're going to do just the first paragraph, or maybe the first couple of sentences to don't make this video too long. But so you get an idea what we are looking for. You listen to it without reading the text. You focus just on the sounds.
Lingua.com. Comprensión lectora. Mi nueva casa. Yo vivo en Granada. Es una ciudad pequeña y tiene monumentos muy importantes, como la Alhambra. Aquí la comida es deliciosa y son famosos el gazpacho, el rebujito o el salmorejo.
So you first just listen. You focus on the sounds of the language. You listen to it without stressing over understanding anything in particular or most of it. Just try to, well, if you understand something, great, but we are focusing on the sounds of the language. And this is important because when you are reading, you are doing many things. It's a very complex process. But one of the things you are doing is decoding the sounds. You are associating the print you see with the sounds, the phonemes. So separating this process first and taking away the sounds and separating it, this just makes things simpler. So first, just listen. And after you have listened to the text, you listen to it again, but this time you read along at the rate of speech. So you read at the same speech that you are hearing the text. Let's try that again. You read silently. You don't read out loud. You hear the text and you follow along reading at the same speed.
Vivo en Granada. Es una ciudad pequeña y tiene monumentos muy importantes, como la Alhambra. Aquí la comida es deliciosa y son famosos el gazpacho, el rebujito o el salmorejo.
If you are a beginner, it's probably too fast for you to follow along comfortably with the text, and you may not understand many of the words, and that's okay. We are just creating now the association between the letters and the sounds. After listening to the text, it's time for step 2, which is understand the text. Now is the time for analyzing the words and making sure you understand the meaning. Now you do focus on meaning, Yo vivo en Granada, una ciudad pequeña que tiene monumentos muy importantes como la Alhambra. And for example, if you're not familiar with the word pequeña, then again is when reverso context is handy. You can just click on the word and this will pop up and it tells you that it's small. However, it's important when you translate to translate the full sentence, and Reverso has now a new feature that gives you the context in which it appears. Ciudad Pequeña is a small town, small city, but you can translate even more. You can select una ciudad pequeña que tiene monumentos, and it gives you a small town with monuments. So you have the translation of everything you are reading. It is very, very, very handy. And with individual words, you can also look for synonyms and many examples here. When you click on it, you can see more and more examples. You can have the audio. So you have everything you need to make sure you understand the text. You listen to the text, and then you understood the text by looking up certain words and sentences, translations, to make sure you are familiar with the vocabulary. And it's time for the third step, which is to feel the text. And in order to make my point here, I want you to follow along with a couple of experiments. And please do follow along, participate here with me, because it's important for you to see why this third step is important. First, I want you to read the following definition of the Japanese word sho and see what comes to mind. Pause if you need to, take your time, but read the definition and see what's in your head. Okay, so it's a wind instrument made of groups of slim and void bamboo stems used in traditional Japanese music. Okay, so now I want you to do the same, but with this definition of a Japanese fruit. Okay, really see what comes to mind after reading it. And third experiment is I want you to imagine an apple. Take your time and imagine an apple. What probably happened here, again, if you took your time to do this, is that with the first experiment, you were struggling to make any associations with it, right? You were not sure what this thing was, and you made a very shallow connection with it. With the second experiment, you may have known that we were talking about an apple, so you may have an idea, but you weren't completely sure by reading the definition. You may not be just 100% certain of what it was, so there was not much connection to it. But I'm sure when I asked you to imagine an apple, lots of things came to mind. Different colors, maybe the smell of it, the taste, maybe a sentence like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So when you imagine an actual apple, there are things coming to your mind, and you are making what is called a multidimensional connection with the idea. And that is what happens in your imagination, in your brain, when you visualize something, when you vividly add imagery to it. And that's what I want you to do in this third step when reading a text. I want you to read, and while you read, you imagine vividly the scene that is being described. So when you are reading, and now you need to first understand the text, obviously, that's why we went through steps 1 and 2. When you read Yo vivo en Granada, una ciudad pequeña, so when you say Yo vivo en Granada, you imagine actually Granada, if you're familiar with it. En una ciudad pequeña, you can imagine a very, very small city with monumentos muy importantes como la Alhambra. Aquí la comida es deliciosa. So the food is delicious. When you read, you are imagining delicious food. And again, you are taking your time. This is a very slow process. This is a very deliberate process of reading. So obviously, most of the time, you're not going to read like this. You're going to save this step-by-step process for a very limited time and instances in your learning journey. But when you do it, just do it right and just experience the text. So you think, el gazpacho, el rebujito, el salmorejo. Again, you have looked up these things before you understand them. So you do a reading where you do visualize everything you are reading about. You are connecting with the text. You are feeling it. And the second way in which you are going to feel the text and connect with it is that this time you are going to read and narrate the text and tell the story like if you were telling it to a child. So you are going to read out loud and you are going to add emotion to it. You are going to add maybe anger, humor, excitement, whatever it is that text is giving you, you are going to do it. So for example, and this would be a bit silly, so you want to do it probably by yourself, but it's important to add emotion. This text is not that easy to add emotion to it because it's just about a new home, but you can dramatize it a lot. So you can say, yo vivo en Granada, una ciudad pequeña que tiene monumentos muy importantes como la Alhambra. Aquí la comida es deliciosa, deliciosa. Y son famosos el gazpacho, el rebujito y el salmorejo. Mi casa está en una calle ancha que tiene muchos árboles. Muchos árboles. It has many trees. So you can see, I'm dramatizing and making it very effortful. Like if I was telling the story to a child and I have to keep them engaged. So first you read the text by adding imagery to it. You imagine, you feel everything that is being described. And then you read it, adding a lot of drama to it too. And the last step in our 4-step reading process would be to master text. That is, you go back to the first thing you did, which is to listen to the text while you read. And you will see how much you have improved your understanding. So I'm not going to do that again, but you just play the audio and go along, and you now should be able to understand all of it. And you can do a last reading also silently by just focusing on the text. And that's it for the 4-step reading process. It is quite involved, of course. So I recommend doing this with short text, as we have seen this one from Bilingual.com or the others on the websites and apps, as well as maybe you can pick just one chapter of a greater reader and do that. But it's better to go deep, especially when you are a beginner and you are not able to understand most of it. Again, you are reading to suffer. In order to get you to read to learn and to read to enjoy, you need to go through these phases. And it is very, very effective. Again, you first listen, then you understand the text, you feel it. This step is important. And then you master it. You listen to it again and you read it, and you will see now how much you understand of it. So that's it for our 4-step reading process. It is quite involved, of course, and I recommend doing this with short text, as we have seen in Lingua.com, or also you can pick up one chapter of the graded readers I have suggested, but it is very, very, very effective. Remember, just listen to the text first, then you understand, analyze the words, looking at the translations if you need to. You feel the text. This step is very important, and then you will realize in the 4th step, when you go through it again, that you have mastered, that you understand now much more of it. Remember the different types of reading: reading to enjoy, reading to learn, reading to suffer, and the level of comprehension required for each of them, and therefore the importance of choosing the right things to read. Do not read children's books. There are much better options. We have shared graded readers, bilingual text, websites with interactive text, as well as apps, Langster, LinkU, and there are, I'm sure, many others that are good. And follow this process of listening, understanding, feeling it, mastering, to make sure you are making the most out of your reading experience. If you have enjoyed today's video, please subscribe to our channel for more on this. We also made a video about how to master vocabulary that you can watch next. And thank you very much. Yo soy Alejandro de KeySpanish y nos vemos en clase.